At what should have been the happiest moment of her life, Cassie was publicly humiliated by her new father-in-law, accused of being nothing more than a gold digger. But before the shame could consume her, her young son Mason took the microphone and exposed a dark family secret that changed everything. As love, courage, and truth collided under the fairy lights, Cassie, Ethan, and Mason fought to reclaim their happiness. Where are you listening from? Share with us in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. More powerful stories await. The barn shimmered under a canopy of fairy lights, the scent of roses and fresh grass floating through the warm evening air. Laughter bubbled at every table, champagne glasses clinked, and the music thrummed a gentle, joyful beat against the wooden beams. I leaned into Ethan's side, feeling the steady pulse of his hand gripping mine under the table. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe it. Happiness was real, and it was mine to keep. Mason, my 8-year-old son, sat nearby, laughing along with Ethan's younger cousins as they swapped silly stories. Everything felt perfect, like a scene out of a dream I dared not imagine after everything Mason and I had survived. Then, as the best man raised his glass for another joke, it happened. Robert Carter, Ethan's father, stood up. The noise of the room dimmed, confusion rippling through the guests as Robert strode across the floor with rigid purpose. He didn't smile. He didn't wait for a microphone to be offered. He snatched it straight from the best man's hand. Ethan's grip on me tightened. I turned toward him, but his face was locked in a careful mask, his jaw set hard. I knew Robert disapproved of me. He had made that abundantly clear in every forced handshake, every cold glance during the rehearsal dinner. But I thought, foolishly, that he would at least pretend for tonight. I thought wrong. Robert's voice sliced through the warm golden air, sharp and deliberate. I think everyone here deserves to know, he said, eyes cold and steady, that she's only after his money. The room froze. Forks hovered midair. Conversations strangled into silence. Hundreds of eyes snapped toward me, and I felt every single one like a brand against my skin. Joy drained from their faces, replaced by confusion, suspicion, pity. I smiled, a brittle, aching smile, because if I cried now, he would win. I smiled even as shame clawed its way up my throat and wrapped icy fingers around my heart. Ethan started to rise, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, but Robert wasn't finished. He loomed over the tables, savoring the stunned silence he'd created, confident, almost triumphant. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream that he didn't know me, that he didn't see the nights I stayed up with Mason's nightmares, or the endless days rebuilding my life from rubble after Mason's father walked away. I wanted to tell them all that love had found me, not through grand gestures or flashy promises, but through a man who remembered the way I liked my tea and knelt down to tie Mason's shoes without a second thought. But I couldn't move. Not yet. A napkin fluttered to the floor nearby. Someone coughed. In the heavy stillness, the barn, once full of laughter, now felt like it might crush me with its weight. And then Mason moved. He pushed his chair back carefully, the sound almost deafening in the silence, and began walking toward the front of the room. At first, I thought he was coming to me, seeking comfort. I half rose from my chair, every instinct screaming to shield him from the ugliness unfolding around us. But Mason didn't come to me. With his napkin still tucked into the collar of his little shirt, he marched straight toward Robert. His small figure looked impossibly brave beneath the towering oak beams and glittering lights. He reached up, on tiptoe, and took the microphone from the startled best man. The guests turned, holding their breath, a sea of faces frozen in disbelief. Mason looked straight at Robert. His voice was steady, clear, impossibly strong for someone so small. "Grandpa," he said, "should I tell them what you did to Grandma?" A wineglass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered against the floor. Gasps broke out like popping firecrackers, ricocheting across the room. The energy, all of it which had been aimed at me, suspicion, judgment, turned sharply, violently onto Robert. For the first time that night, Robert faltered. And for the first time since he stood up to destroy me, I realized he wasn't the one holding the power anymore. Robert's face drained of color. The confident gleam snuffed out in an instant. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Around the room, a ripple of shocked murmurs broke through the silence. Mason stood there, steady as a stone, the microphone clutched in his small hands. I pressed my fingertips to my lips, my heart hammering in my chest so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I wanted to run to him, to sweep him up and shield him from the storm he had walked into. But something in his stance stopped me. A quiet determination, a bravery I hadn't even realized he had been carrying. He wasn't afraid. He was telling the truth, and Robert knew it. For a long, awful moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Robert's hand twitched at his side, his mouth working uselessly for an explanation that wouldn't come. Then, from a table near the front, a chair scraped against the wooden floor. Everyone turned as a man slowly rose to his feet. Uncle Frank. Quiet, unassuming Uncle Frank, who had always lingered at the edges of family gatherings, who rarely spoke unless spoken to. He stood there, hands trembling slightly, but his voice was clear when he said, "I heard it too." The room shuddered. It wasn't just Mason anymore. It wasn't just a child's voice, easy to dismiss. It was another adult, another witness, stepping out of the shadows. "I was there," Uncle Frank continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I was there the night you yelled at Eleanor. I heard you tell her she was a burden, that you wished the stroke had taken her." A strangled gasp escaped someone at the back of the barn. My knees nearly gave out under me. I reached for the table to steady myself, but Ethan was already there, his hand firm at the small of my back, grounding me. Robert shook his head violently, like a man swatting at invisible insects. "That's not true," he barked, voice cracking. "You're twisting things." "No, Robert," Uncle Frank interrupted, stronger now. "We twisted ourselves trying to cover for you all these years. Enough." The barn, once a glowing haven of celebration, now felt like a courtroom. Every eye, every ounce of energy shifted from me to Robert, pinning him in place. For the first time I saw fear in Robert's eyes, not the anger or disdain he had always worn like armor, but real, naked fear. Mason lowered the microphone and turned back toward me, his job done. I stumbled toward him, gathering him into my arms as Ethan wrapped both of us in his embrace. Mason clung to me tightly, his small body shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. I pressed a kiss to his hair, murmuring how proud I was, how brave he was. Robert staggered back a step, almost bumping into a server frozen mid-step, a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres wobbling in her hands. The guests began to whisper in earnest now, little currents of outrage and disbelief swirling around the room. Old family friends exchanged horrified glances. Business partners shook their heads grimly. Robert turned in a slow circle, looking for someone, anyone, to defend him. No one moved. Across the room, Aunt Rachel wiped tears from her eyes. Ethan's cousin Leo muttered something under his breath and stood up, dragging his fiancée with him toward the exit. The collapse was complete. Robert was alone. The wedding planner, sensing disaster teetering toward full collapse, hovered near the entrance where two security guards in dark suits had subtly appeared. They waited, silent and watchful, for the inevitable end. Ethan pressed a kiss to my temple, his voice low but fierce. "I've got you," he whispered. "We're going to be okay." I nodded, blinking back a fresh wave of tears, not from fear this time, but from something stronger, fiercer, relief. We weren't hiding anymore. The ugly truth, so long buried, was finally clawing its way into the light, and for once it wasn't me who would be destroyed by it. Robert straightened his jacket with shaking hands, his face twisting into something between rage and humiliation. But the power he had wielded so casually just minutes ago had evaporated. Mason looked up at me then, his blue eyes wide but sure, and in that moment I realized we had already won. For a moment, Robert stood rooted to the spot, looking as though he might say something, some desperate attempt to claw his way back from the wreckage. But the words never came. The guests watched him with something worse than judgment now. With disappointment, disgust, and maybe worst of all, pity. Ethan shifted beside me, his hand still resting protectively on Mason's shoulder. His body was tense, a storm barely contained, but when he spoke, his voice was calm and steady, cutting through the thick, suffocating air. "I think you should leave," Ethan said. Robert flinched like he'd been slapped. His gaze flickered from Ethan to Mason to me, desperate, searching for some hint of mercy. He found none. Slowly, stiffly, he reached for his coat draped over the back of his chair. He threw it over his arm with a jerky motion and stalked toward the exit. No one tried to stop him. No one even said goodbye. The heavy barn doors creaked open, letting in a gust of cool evening air, and then swung shut behind him with a deep, final thud. Silence reigned for a heartbeat longer, as if the building itself was exhaling. Then, from somewhere near the back, someone began to clap. It was hesitant at first, uncertain, and then another joined in. And another. Until the barn filled with a rising tide of applause, not polite or perfunctory, but raw and real, surging around us like a tide, pulling us out of the wreckage and into something new. Ethan turned to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears, and lifted my hand to his lips. He kissed my knuckles softly, then straightened and faced the crowd. "This woman," he said, voice thick with emotion, "is the love of my life. She didn't come into it for money or comfort or anything but love. She's been my anchor when I lost my way, my home when I didn't know I was searching for one. And today, in front of all of you, I couldn't be prouder to call her my wife." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't look away. I stood tall, my hands still locked with Mason's, letting every single guest see us for who we truly were. Not a scandal, not a shame, but a family. The applause swelled, people rising to their feet, their faces open and warm now. The betrayal, the humiliation Robert had tried to carve into me, had been burned away by something stronger. Ethan turned back to me with a grin, a real one this time, full of life and love. He bowed slightly, offering his hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Carter?" My laugh broke free, shaky but real, and I placed my hand in his. The band, after a quick, uncertain glance at the wedding planner, struck up the soft, familiar chords of our song. As Ethan pulled me into his arms and we began to sway across the floor, the fairy lights above seemed to spin with us, the golden glow wrapping around us like a blessing. Halfway through the song, Mason darted toward us, his small hand tugging at Ethan's jacket. Without hesitation, Ethan bent down, braced him, scooped him up, and held him between us. The three of us spun slowly under the lights, laughter and music weaving together around us, stitching the broken pieces back into something whole. All around us, the reception breathed back to life. Guests returned to their tables, conversations restarted, children giggled and ran barefoot across the grass outside. Life didn't pause for cruelty. It refused to be poisoned by one bitter man's hate. My sister Callie approached with tears shining in her eyes. She pressed a kiss to my cheek and whispered, "You are exactly where you're meant to be." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. I glanced down at Mason, who beamed up at us, pure joy radiating from him. He had stood up when even the adults had faltered. He had been the bravest of us all. As the night wore on and stars began to dust the darkening sky, I knew without a doubt this was not the ending Robert had tried to script for us. This was a new beginning, and it was ours. The music wrapped around us like a balm, smoothing over the raw edges left behind. As Ethan, Mason, and I spun slowly beneath the canopy of lights, something shifted in the air. A lightness, a letting go. It wasn't that the hurt disappeared. It lingered, like a bruise under the surface. But the weight of it no longer defined the room. Love did. The guests moved with careful joy at first, as if unsure whether it was truly safe to breathe again. But soon, laughter began to bubble back up between tables. Plates clattered as people returned to their meals. Children darted through the open barn doors, chasing each other into the warm summer night, their shrieks of delight carrying across the fields. I rested my head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling the solid beat of his heart under my cheek. Mason tucked safely between us, still holding tightly to Ethan's neck, as if afraid that if he let go, everything might vanish. "You saved us," I whispered against Ethan's ear, my voice trembling with the truth of it. "Both of you." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes fierce and full of something that felt like a vow. "No, Cassie," he said. "You saved me the day you walked into my life and didn't run when you saw the broken pieces." My throat tightened. I had spent so long believing I had to do everything alone, that love was something fragile, something you had to tiptoe around to keep it from breaking. But here, wrapped in Ethan's arms, Mason's small hands clinging to us, I realized real love wasn't fragile at all. It was fierce. It fought back when threatened. It stood its ground. As the song faded, we stayed on the dance floor, reluctant to let go of the moment. A few other couples ventured out, joining us in the soft glow of fairy lights. Friends and family members passed by, some offering hugs, others murmuring quiet words of support and apology. I felt the old walls I had built around my heart cracking open, letting the warmth seep in. Later, as the reception eased into something freer and less formal, I found myself standing with Mason near one of the open doors, watching the stars blink awake in the darkening sky. He leaned against me, tired now, his energy spent. "You were so brave today," I said, brushing a strand of hair back from his forehead. He shrugged in that way only 8-year-olds could, like it hadn't been a big deal at all. "I just told the truth," he said simply. "Sometimes the purest courage comes wrapped in small voices and simple words." Behind us, the band struck up a livelier tune. Guests twirled and laughed, clapping along to the beat. Uncle Frank and Aunt Rachel danced together awkwardly but with huge goofy smiles. Callie snagged a slice of cake with 2 forks and dragged her boyfriend onto the lawn for a midnight picnic. Life moved forward. At one point, the wedding planner passed by and gave me a discreet thumbs up, her face relieved. The catastrophe everyone had feared hadn't destroyed the night. It had revealed something stronger at the heart of it. Resilience. Truth. "Family." Ethan found me by the door and slipped his hand into mine. "Tired?" he asked, smiling gently. "A little," I admitted. "Come with me." He led me outside where the lawn was scattered with flickering candles in glass jars. Away from the crowd, the night was quieter, the music just a soft pulse in the distance. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass, and the stars seemed to lean in closer, almost close enough to touch. Ethan turned to me, framing my face between his hands. "This," he said, his voice low and certain, "is just the beginning." I smiled, the last of the ache in my chest loosening. "It's a good beginning." He kissed me then, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that wasn't about show or ceremony, but about survival, about making it through the fire and still choosing each other on the other side. When we pulled apart, Mason was waiting, sleepy-eyed but smiling. He tucked his small hand into mine without a word, and together we walked back toward the barn, ready to step fully into the life that was waiting for us. Not perfect, not easy, but real, and finally, truly ours. The morning after the wedding, sunlight spilled through the wide windows, painting the room in soft gold. I woke with Mason curled against my side, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Ethan's arm was thrown over both of us, his hand resting protectively against my hip. For a long, beautiful moment, I stayed still, soaking in the quiet, letting the reality of everything settle. The chaos of the night before could have shattered us. It could have left cracks too deep to heal. But as I watched Mason snuggle closer in his sleep and felt Ethan's steady breathing beside me, I knew it hadn't. It had revealed something stronger, something unbreakable. Later, we sat on the back porch, coffee mugs warm between our hands, a blanket wrapped loosely around our shoulders. The fields stretched out in front of us, glistening with morning dew, the sky blindingly blue and clean, as if even the world itself was starting over. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Ethan said, his voice low, rough with the weight of everything he couldn't fix. I turned to him, cupping his jaw in my hand. "I'm not," I said softly, surprising even myself with the depth of my certainty. If Robert hadn't spoken, we might have spent years wondering, always guarding ourselves, always doubting. Now, there's nothing left to hide. Ethan leaned his forehead against mine, breathing me in like a prayer. "You amaze me," he whispered. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable unfolded. The walls that had once stood between us and the rest of Ethan's family began to crumble. Invitations arrived for family dinners and birthday parties. People who had once stayed distant now leaned closer, no longer carrying the weight of silent judgment. Uncle Frank, quiet and awkward, pulled Ethan aside at a backyard barbecue one Saturday and apologized. He admitted he had stayed silent for too long, afraid of causing more harm. But the truth had set something free. In all of us. Even the family's stories about Eleanor, once told in hushed, uncomfortable tones, started to surface. People remembered her laugh, her stubborn kindness, the way she used to sing while cooking Sunday dinners. It was as if by telling the truth about what had happened to her, they finally gave themselves permission to celebrate the parts of her that were never broken. And Mason, sweet, brave Mason, thrived. He asked questions about truth and bravery, about standing up even when you're scared. We answered the best we could, careful to show him that telling the truth wasn't about punishment. It was about healing, about lighting a path not just for yourself, but for everyone who needed it. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, Mason looked up at me with wide, searching eyes. "I was scared when I said it," he admitted. "I thought maybe you'd be mad." I brushed his hair back from his forehead, my heart squeezing tight. "I could never be mad at you for telling the truth," I said. "You were braver than most grown-ups that night." He smiled, small and proud, and drifted off to sleep, the kind of sleep that only comes when you know you're safe. Months later, when Ethan officially adopted Mason, we stood before the judge, the three of us hand in hand. Mason, in his best button-up shirt and navy slacks, stood straight and tall. When the judge asked if he wanted to say anything, Mason cleared his throat, his voice small but certain. "I just want to say," he said, "that Ethan has always been my real dad, even before today." The judge smiled, and there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom as the papers were signed, sealing what we had already known in our hearts. As we walked out into the sunshine, Mason swinging our hands between us, I tilted my face to the sky, letting the light soak into every scar, every crack, every place that once thought it could never heal. Robert had tried to tear us apart. Instead, he had forced us to show exactly who we were. Not broken, not ashamed, but stronger than we had ever been. Forged in fire, bound by truth. A real family, built not by blood alone, but by love that had chosen to stay, to fight, to believe. And this, I knew without a doubt, was only the beginning. Sometimes the greatest trials reveal the deepest truths about who we are and who truly stands beside us. In the face of humiliation, betrayal, and cruelty, Cassie, Ethan, and Mason showed that real strength doesn't come from fighting louder or harder. It comes from standing tall in your truth, even when it hurts. Love that endures is not love that hides behind appearances. It's the kind that weathers the storms, that speaks up when it's easier to stay silent, that chooses kindness and loyalty even when the world is watching. Mason's small but fearless voice reminds us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers just loud enough to break the lies apart, and in doing so it frees not only the one speaking, but everyone shackled by fear. True family is not built on bloodlines or approval from others. It's built by those who stay, who choose each other day after day, even when it would be easier to walk away. When life tries to shake your foundation, remember this: scars do not make you weak. They make you real. And no amount of hatred can destroy the kind of love built on honesty, respect, and trust. Sometimes what feels like the end of your world is really the beginning of a much better one. Stronger, braver, and more beautiful than you ever dared dream. Where are you listening from? I would love to know. Leave a comment below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story about courage, love, and second chances. Thank you for being here with me. This is just the beginning.